In times when Mr. Harvey was too ill to record his broadcasts, he turned that task over to the creator and sole writer of the rest of the story. Here's Paul Harvey Jr.
Now, the rest of the story. Since his days as a cub reporter for the Chicago Tribune, Melville Stone wanted a newspaper of his own. And now he had one, or at least the beginnings of one. Christmas Day, 1875, he made the announcement publicly. Chicago's new newspaper would begin daily publication on January 1, and it did. That first day, 9,000 copies were sold, and yes, that was exceptional for all those years ago. Within a week, Mr. Stone actually had to refuse advertising. No room for more ads in the fledgling publication, and I'll tell you why the paper was so successful so soon. Its price. While other newspapers were selling for 5 cents a copy, Melville Stone's newspaper was selling for a penny. And so had publisher Stone outdone his competitors. He provided the same news for 5 times less. He had considered the idea of a penny paper for many years. He'd conducted surveys. He'd even published a test newspaper for several months called the Herald, penny-priced, and it was a success. So it was with great confidence that Mr. Stone embarked upon this revolutionary penny newspaper project. He'd anticipated everything but one thing: a citywide penny shortage. He'd barged into a world of nickel newspapers with a newspaper that sold for a penny and was initially enormously successful, but then as Mr. Stone sought to increase the circulation of his publication, he found that there were just so many pennies to go around in Chicago. Not enough for him to expand his newspaper beyond the beginning stages. So the publisher set out to make pennies popular. He set out to make pennies popular so that everyone would carry pennies with which to purchase his newspaper. You know, publisher Melville Stone was only 27 years old at the time, but that penny newspaper of his would continue to be published for more than 100 years. You may recall that Melville Stone also founded and was for many years general manager of the Associated Press. But this surely you never knew: Melville Stone's original plan to popularize pennies. You see, folks rarely needed a denomination of currency smaller than a nickel back then, because merchandise was evenly priced. 50 cents, 60 cents, $1, $2. It was Melville Stone who went around convincing Chicago merchants that 49 cents sounded much less expensive than 50, and that 99 cents sounded much less expensive than $1. So it was publisher Stone who gave merchants the idea of bargain pricing at a penny less. And he even ordered barrels from the U.S. Mint for the merchants to make that penny change for customers. Of course, that left every customer in every store in Chicago with at least 1 penny in his pocket with which to purchase, conveniently, Melville Stone's penny newspaper. And that's how odd-priced bargains began. Not to sell merchandise, but to sell the Chicago Daily News. Only now, you know the rest of the story.
And now, the rest of the story. Melville Stone made a brilliant move when he convinced the retailers and restaurants to drop their pricing so they would have spare change to buy his penny newspaper. But wait a minute, is this story true? Bill Kemp, archivist and historian at the McLean County Museum of History in Illinois, wrote a short biography on Melville. In it, Bill said Stone's legacy rests with the establishment of the Chicago Daily News in the mid-1870s and, more importantly, his 26 years as general manager of the reorganized AP, that's Associated Press, which under his leadership became one of the greatest news-gathering operations the world has ever seen. In its heyday, the Daily News was a leading American newspaper with its pioneering international coverage by correspondents in London, Paris, and other seats of Victorian and Edwardian realpolitik. Now listen to this. Bill said the Chicago Daily News was Chicago's first penny paper, and a fanciful story has it that Stone, frustrated by the lack of 1-cent coins in circulation, brought into the Windy City barrels of pennies direct from the United States Mint. He also convinced merchants, or so the story goes, to price goods at 99 or 59 cents, the idea being the penny change could be used to buy his daily news. Fanciful story, or so the story goes? It's easy to tell that Bill was unconvinced. Now, can you imagine someone going around to shops and restaurants and asking them to drop their prices, if only by 1 cent? Bet that didn't go over too well. If you do an online search, you'll find many versions of this tale. To determine if there really was a shortage of pennies around the time Melville Stone supposedly convinced retailers and restaurants to adopt their new pricing strategy, I looked at the official Red Book, a guidebook of United States coins for 2025. I created a line graph which shows how many pennies were minted each year between 1865 and 1888. Take a look. In 1865, the U.S. minted more than 35 million pennies. The next year, the number minted was just shy of 10 million. But if we look around the time that Melville Stone began his Chicago Daily News and purportedly convinced retailers and restaurants to lower their prices, we will see that over this period, 1877 and 1879, there were far fewer pennies being minted. In 1877, there were less than 900,000, the lowest of the whole period. In 1879, the U.S. minted just over 160,000 pennies. But now look at the year 1880. In that year, the U.S. minted almost 39 million pennies. Is this evidence of a penny shortage? Could Melville Scott's pricing strategy have been responsible for the huge increase in minted pennies in 1880? This line graph certainly looks good, but there's just not enough evidence to be sure. Now, the technique Melville Stone is said to be responsible for is referred to as odd-even pricing. Odd-even pricing is a psychological pricing strategy that is still common today. The goal of this type of pricing is to make small pricing adjustments that will drive sales and maximize profits. The odd part of this tactic refers to a price ending in usually a 7 or a 9, while the even part refers to the price ending in whole numbers, usually in tenths such as 20 cents or 50 cents, or even on the whole dollar. If a company marks a $20 item down to $19.99, our brains perceive it as being significantly cheaper because the number is still in the teens rather than in the 20s. Odd pricing creates the illusion that the product is listed at the lowest possible price. That's what our brains think. Since the number is so precise, we, gullible consumers, perceive it as being a good deal. Now take a look at gas prices. They go one step further. Gas prices show the price usually ending in odd numbers, then include, in much smaller numbers, 9/10. So now our brains think we're getting a better deal because the cents end in an odd number, and thinks it's even a better deal because we see the odd tenths behind that. Now let's look at even pricing. Even pricing has the opposite effect of odd pricing. Customers generally consider an item rounded up to the nearest dollar as being more expensive and maybe even a luxury item. Because the price is rounded up, our brains often perceive the product as being of a higher value. This is referred to as the image effect. If we see an advertisement which told us that all jeans started at $29.99, our brains tell us that it's a much better deal than if it said all jeans starting at $30. Keep in mind that this is just the starting price. Family-style chain restaurants use the same technique for the same reason. Luxury restaurants, on the other hand, would never have odd pricing because they want the customers to think of it as luxury dining. They expect to pay more. They expect better quality, better service, but they expect to pay more. Odd pricing motivates impulse buys and larger purchases. Now, if we see 3 items, one is $9.99, the other 2 are $9.97, we are more apt to buy all 3 than if each was priced at $10. We don't want to have to do the complicated math to figure out exactly how much the 3 items will cost. At most, we might say that it's just under $30, which again makes us think we're getting a better deal than we really are. For store owners, the odd pricing system helped keep cashiers honest. When prices end on an even dollar, cashiers could quickly calculate the total in their heads and not record it on the cash register. This made it much easier for cashiers to steal from the store, to pocket that money. Consumer experts have concluded that consumers pay attention to the first digit of a price, so changing a price from $3 to $2.99 seems like a good value. This is called the left digit effect because most of us read pricing from left to right. Take a look at this example. According to the left digit effect, our brains see the 2 from $29.99 first and the 3 from $30 first. In most cases, we would be more apt to buy the $29.99 one. Also notice that the dollar amounts are larger than the cent amount. Notice that the 29 is almost twice the size of the 99. The odd-even pricing strategy is all around us today. Whether in stores or online, most retailers and restaurants utilize this strategy to bring in more money. So do we have Melville Stone to thank for that? Most experts credit odd-even pricing not with Melville Stone, but with J.C. Penney based on their research in the early 1900s. So really, who should get credit for odd-even pricing? I guess we'll never know. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. Watch your pocketbook, and now you know the rest of the story.